Everyone, it's Matthew here with episode 4 of Swordscomic Secrets. We're starting today with episode 31, which is another Knife episode. Knife and her wife, Shiv, are trying to fix the fact that Shiv was accidentally turned into a baby by a magical sort of healing. So the first person that she consults is Chris the Necromancer, who tries to sell her a blade of entropy. And then he demos it on himself and turns himself into a corpse. This is almost the last time chronologically that he's appeared in the series. It is set after a few of his other appearances a bit later on, but he gets better. So that's about all there is to say about this one. 32 introduces Mary, the sort of New Zealand-inspired warrior character. It's not a great joke, if I'm being honest, but at the time I just kind of wanted to get some representation in. There's sort of a lot of, I guess, talk about cultural appropriation and that sort of thing when you do these kind of things. And so for me, when it was all the way back in year 1 of Swords, it didn't really bother me because it's not like I was making money off this project. But now that I'm trying to be more mindful, which is why these characters haven't shown up so much lately. I'm just kind of looking for the right people to collaborate with, or the right opportunity, or the right platform to flesh out these storylines. So these characters don't show up very much anymore, but I'd like to keep them around. In this episode, the two fawns are introduced, Baselard and Dirk, who are looking for their friend Stabbins. It's sort of a continuation of the Lord of the Rings tropes from the episode where Stabbins was introduced, where there are other fawns, not halflings, who are trying to catch up. It's sort of meeting The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the Lord of the Rings, marrying them together into one parody by making them fawns. It's very Mr. Tumnus inspired. And orcs were not quite fully fleshed out yet, but I wanted to make them a little different, so they're quite, in this one, they're quite regal and they are quite sophisticated, and he does mention that he's very tall, so they're very tall and lithe rather than broad and muscular. So this episode is just sort of a creationist argument. It's just kind of for fun because in the Swords universe, the script is kind of flipped and everyone knows there's a god and they take it for granted in their daily lives that he's just there. It's not really a matter of faith, it's just a matter of fact. And everyone exclusively argues over how many eyes Kargop has. So, it wasn't really meant to point fingers at anyone, but there was a version before this which had a little bit more aggressive wording and that upset some people, so I did change it. So this is more of a formal introduction to orcs. We saw them before, but this time around they are sort of the tech, the Silicon Valley type characters. This is Steve Orcs, who's obviously poking fun at genius billionaires. But basically they have these swords, the smart sword, which is just, it's got lots and lots of runes on it. So it's not actually a technological sword, it's still magic, but it's magic that's being leveraged in a sophisticated way. And yeah, there's some comments I get sometimes that friendly fire should be enabled, not disabled. I've always been meaning to go back and fix it, but I never really get around to it. And also, people get confused about the joke because basically he sticks the sword in while it won't harm anyone, and then he pulls it out because there was dwarf detected inside the orc's stomach. And the thing sticking out of the blade is the orc's whole stomach. It's come out with him. So yeah, this episode is not very well communicated for a number of reasons. And also people often get confused by the sword being able to talk when it says friend and enemy. Like, it just, there's too many points of failure basically where people sort of trip up on this one. So it's kind of one I'd like to go back and clean up a bit, simplify, and make sure all of the wording is clearer. But that's about it. This one's a continuation of the Bright Knight and Night Knight storyline, tied in with the concept of swords getting their own souls. It doesn't really very well illustrate the passage of time because it switches between summer and winter twice instead of going through the seasons. I don't actually know if the Swords universe has all of those seasons. It probably has a fifth one to do with swords raining from the sky we haven't discussed yet. But I hope it sort of gives you an idea that these two swords have come to life and they love each other very much. And also, it does raise some questions whether this was 100 years ago that these two swords were left here. The answer is no. They've come alive quite quickly after being abandoned in that spot. And this area is called Promise Point, which is a place where a war takes place later in the series. This is the next Bread Night episode. It's where I took a huge creative gamble and made elves super weird. I originally had this episode with the elf hanging upside down from the ceiling looking into a crystal ball. So elves were going to be even more sort of nocturnal creatures, fae, vampire kind of things. But I decided that was a few too many things going on. But basically, yeah, they have one big pair of nocturnal eyes, and then they have 4 eyebrows, which are meant to sort of look like spider's eyes, so that, you can imagine it'd be a survival technique to appear to have more eyes than you do, which confuses the readers too, because they actually think elves have 6 eyes, which isn't the case. They have one pair of eyes. But also with their color scheme, I didn't want to make them just pretty humans. That's something that, as a trope in fantasy, I don't really like so much, as the idea of the perfect humanoid who's blonde and blue-eyed and can do no wrong and lives forever. I think that has a few too many issues attached to it. So I just wanted to abandon all of that and make elves something sort of unique. I think giving them a lower set of tusks was a bad choice creatively, because people always call them orcs. In every situation that they show up in, someone calls them an orc, which has been really interesting because I've done that with other creatures as well, which I don't think look anything like orcs either. But as soon as you put those tusks on a creature, they're suddenly an orc somehow. So yeah. Also, I gave them little tufts of fur on the end of their ears, just because I, again, didn't want them to be too pretty. It sort of flawed them a bit. So there were lots of choices making elves super, super weird. In what is otherwise a pretty cringe dad joke about wearing a suit of chainmail from a post office. So there you go. This episode reintroduces Chad the Bastard Sword. He wasn't originally called Chad the Bastard Sword, it was just Chad the Sword. But because of this origin where he's a sort of hybrid between a half-human, half-sword and a half-human, half-orc, and that makes him full sword, fans started calling him Chad the Bastard Sword, and it caught on, and that ended up being his official designation. He does have a little bum in this episode that isn't available on Webtoon. They made me take it out. But, most of the time he has a butt. And if I ever make a makeshift plushie, he'll definitely have a butt. And you can see in the background that Chris the Necromancer is standing next to the well where he was selling his zombies. So this is happening simultaneously with that. This is Harp, realizing that the tournament is on, and she goes and asks the lake monster for a sword to enter the tournament with, because, she wants to be a knight, and this is a great way to prove herself. She's just kind of that gung-ho character, excited to do quests. Another popular character adopts that persona later on, I suppose. But she's the original quest enthusiast of the series. And this one just starts with her picking some berries. And then this is episode 40, which is the kind of mic drop storyline, all connecting it together kind of thing, where the sorcerer from episode 2 turns out to have been training King Hilton his entire life to find the 5 god swords, which, ties everything together a bit. So obviously you've got Argok's Edge, you've got Greg's Vein, Kargob's Fang, Bolthad's Blade, and Bulgrek's Hook are the names of the 5 god swords. And that all kind of came out later, very slowly. And then you can see that King Hilton is looking over his kingdom. It's a sort of walled-in city. And, finally, it sort of insinuates that the plan is to host this tournament to bring these god sword wielders together, which it does for the most part throughout the rest of the story arc. So that's it for today's episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.